Hello and welcome to the ESI Africa Studio African Utility Week. I'm Rose Bundock and I'm joined now by Ntlai Mosiah, Head of Power and Infrastructure South Africa Client Coverage at Standard Bank. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Ntlai, you've been around the event for the past couple of days in various different sessions. What have been your findings so far from the show?
Well, thank you. Firstly, I think we've really enjoyed this event. It brings all the top decision makers together. Of course, there's exhibitors and so forth, so it offers a lot of value for delegates and the public who participate. But we've also had very bespoke events that we as Standard Bank make sure that we participate in, contribute to the discussion. So, we've had our own CEO forum within AUW. We've participated in the Power Africa initiative. We've attended the DTI Sanea Gas Initiative launch and various other launches by private companies. So we have found it very engaging and very exciting.
So what's been the tone of conversations? Positive about Africa's growth this year?
Yeah, I think there are some headwinds that African governments are facing, and this affects the utilities as well because, obviously almost all of them are state-owned. But there's also a lot of enthusiasm about things that are happening like gas programs, rolling out of new renewables, initiatives such as scaling solar, which is happening in Zambia, supported by the World Bank. These have shoots of optimism that have come up.
So we're in Q2 now. What can we expect to see in Q3, Q4 in terms of deals, projects coming online?
Yeah. I hear you. Infrastructure deals are notoriously long in coming to fruition. So the key announcements have been in South Africa around the gas program. So last week, the Department of Energy, the minister announced 600 megawatts, requiring a strategic partner, 1.5 gigawatts of a solar farm. So that's been quite good. The rest of the continent, it's really been, like I said, the Zambia story on scaling solar. And in the rest of East Africa and West Africa, it's really been a continuation of some of the programs that have been carrying on, like gas programs. So we're finding a lot of movement to try and get away from diesel as an expensive source towards gas, and then rehabilitation of certain hydro power plants.
Okay, and what about in terms of options, financing options? What's out there at the moment?
Financing is very much linked to the pool of financing we look at is often linked to the risk of the project at a particular stage. So quite early on, developers often require equity financing to get the feasibility and get all of that going. That's not the space that the banks play in. So we're not equity providers, but the sponsors come through, and we're starting to see stronger and stronger sponsors that have got the equity to carry the pre-feasibility. When it comes to senior debt, which is what we do, the projects are huge. The first port of call is always the DFIs. We call upon the DFIs to be part of the project, to take on the longer tenors of the project, which is the duration of the debt. There are a number of years that are out there for the debt, and we tend to take the shorter tenors because we are governed under Basel and Basel regulations and so forth. We're seeing ECAs very active in the continent, and then we're seeing pension fund money, so local money starting to be deployed into projects as they get de-risked and they get refinanced going forward.
Okay. So are there any investment hotspots on the continent at the moment?
Well, the way things are at the moment, with the commodity prices where they are and the troubles that governments are having, there's probably more low points and cooler points, but we're still very enthusiastic about what's going to be happening in South Africa in the near future. That's all been announced. Mozambique is still going ahead, even though they have suffered a downgrade. We see the projects themselves carrying on because government is committed and EDM is committed to their strategy. Kenya is going great guns. A lot of the oil-producing countries, have suffered a bit of a setback, and there's budget adjustments happening in Nigeria and in Angola, so we expect a slowdown there. Projects like the Inga 3 in the DRC, who knows? There's a lot of talk about it, there's a lot of market interest. We're watching, following up on it, and we'll see how that unfolds.
Okay. So there's some of the challenges and some of the opportunities.
It's a mixed bag, and part of our job as banks is to be selective. We employ very good people at Standard Bank. We've got a lot of experience with these projects. You've got to choose the ones that you think can reach financial close. Speak to the sponsors, speak to the government. Let's make sure that everyone agrees on what's needed for these projects to close. And we're certainly backing quite a lot of projects on that basis.
So is there a recipe for success to become a bankable project?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And we are always very clear and firm about this, that the more we can repeat our statements about what it needs, the more it's likely to happen. Number one, government plays a big role because these projects require a sovereign underpin or strong buyer support. That might be a private company, of course, with private PPAs. Government plays a key role. The environment in the country, the macroeconomic environment must be conducive for investors. So, rule of law and currency. You need some stability around the currency, other ability to hedge or to pass that risk on. And then the program that government embarks on. It must be clear because these projects require significant investment, and investors want to know that for the next 10, 15, 20 years, there's policy certainty, there's tariff certainty, and there's legislative and regulatory certainty. So that needs to be clear. I think what also helps a lot, we tend to find, is if there's a clear political champion in the country who says, this is the position of my government, I'm a senior government official, this is the way that I'm driving, then people almost know that's the railing point. That's the guy or the lady that we can count on, that issues the statements, and we listen to what they say about what the next step is.
In the news yesterday, we heard about Nigeria saying that it can't afford solar, can't afford to fund solar. What's your opinion of that?
Solar, and I spoke about this as well in the panel that we had yesterday with the CEOs of the utilities. And we spoke about this issue, and it became very clear in the conversation that the affordability of solar is highly linked to the scale at which you deploy it. So if you go 100, 200 megawatts, there isn't sufficient volume, economies of scale, to justify an extensive investment which brings volume and pushes prices down. So in the opposite in South Africa, we've seen a commitment by the government to procure 18 gigawatts by 2030. That has helped the prices go down. It's allowed a program which is progressive in terms of the bid windows that encourages the competition. So what we spoke about with the CEOs is the various mechanisms that we can ensure that the pricing becomes competitive. So it'll be very interesting when we see what's happening on the Zambian scaling solar program. So I think that's going to be a lesson for us, the West Africans, the East Africans, to see what happens with the prices of solar power.
Do you get the feeling that people are still unsure of the right energy mix to kind of get the lowest kilowatt hours?
Yeah, and that is something that I don't expect to disappear immediately, because the final optimal energy mix is a combination of various factors. One of them being environmental. That's key because we're all trying to reduce our footprint in line with commitments at COP. Secondly, being what resource do you have, okay? Thirdly, being how resilient is that resource to, for example, drought. And then fourthly, being what are the regional dynamics that allow you to be able to think of your energy mix not as in country, but outside country as well. And that then brings in dependability on what other countries are doing. So because of that, it becomes a bit of a vicious circle. It's good to have a vision of where you think the energy mix is going to end up, but quite often there are factors which are outside of your control, such as the drought, which you have to compensate for.
So do you think other countries are still looking to South Africa as a model, for example, the renewable energy procurement program?
I think countries in the region, countries in the region look to each other for different strengths. If you have a look at what Zambia did and the way that they set up their office that is a one-stop shop for all investors, the IPP, to go to one place where they gather everything. You know, in contrast, in South Africa, we did not achieve that to that extent. In the first few rounds of renewable energy, developers literally had to run around to different places to get your ESCOM quotation, to get your environmental water use license in the case of baseload coal, etc. So the lessons from SA is around scale and a program and a political champion and strong advisors. the lessons from other African countries also stand out on their own. So I think it's an ongoing process of learning from each other.
And to sum up, what's your best piece of advice for someone that's just looking to get a project financed in this climate?
In this climate, and those are the key words. In this climate, it's around choosing the right deal, making sure that the government is backing and supporting the transaction that you're looking at, making sure you've got the right sponsors. So if you're a small guy with a piece of land and you want to bring in the right sponsors nice and early, and make sure that you've got a really robust financial case. So the tariff is realistic. So because you don't want to go all the way down and finally a Minister of Finance says this tariff is unrealistic. So make sure it's realistic and that the returns that you're asking for are realistic for the risk that you're taking. Those are the fundamentals that make us look at a transaction. And once we start to look at a transaction, we can bring in additional mitigation such as the DFIs, ECA funding, and additional pools of liquidity. It might be a bond takeout, etc. We'll do all of that, but the developers just need to do that early part by themselves.
Okay. So if people get their ducks in a row, there's still financing around?
Banks are open for business, and we are eager for business. These type of assets are critical for the development of the economies, and they're very attractive assets because they are long-term, highly dependable assets, but it has to be structured correctly at the beginning to be sustainable so that when we sell some of these assets on, whoever's investing in these can be assured of those long-term revenue streams.
Ntlai, thank you for your words of financial wisdom.
This has been fantastic.
That's
Thanks
all
for
we've got
having us
time
here.
for. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers.